Now, Ian, your son has the rather unwieldy condition called CFC, cardiofaciocutaneous syndrome, and you've said that raising him is like raising a question mark. Tell us a bit about Walker. What's it like interacting with Walker? What is he like?
He's a very engaging young man, emotionally engaging and physically engaging. If he were here, he would be walking around inspecting everybody, any jewelry. He seems to prefer women. He would get up into your laps and stare down your blouse. And I thought that was a condition of his affliction. But his workers say that it seems too deliberate, really, to be to be something like that. He is 14. He looks about 9. He has the mind of a 2-year-old, and always will, I suspect. He's fed through a tube because he can't swallow. Because he can't speak. Some people with his condition can speak, but it seems that what you make up. He can walk, and his metabolic system is pretty solid, and he doesn't have that many seizures, but he can't speak. Whereas the children or adults who have CFC who can speak, they tend to have more seizures and have many more metabolic problems. So it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. We don't know how well he can see or hear, though his sight and his hearing seems to be improving. He's often preoccupied with what's in front of him, but as I say, he is capable of having an emotional relationship with you if you can let yourself do that.
And I love at one point in the book you talk about, in relation to another woman with a disability, how she has a very limited ability to make jokes, but she takes advantage of that. She has a sense of humour and she uses it. Does Walker do something similar?
Yes. Yeah, that was Isabel. She had a very rare kind of cerebral palsy, and she was literally splayed, permanently splayed, open like that in a wheelchair, and cannot even move her head. But she is. She can raise her eyes up to say yes and down to say no, and she would sometimes go down when she meant yes, is to play a joke. It was the only joke she can make, really, but she makes it, and it's an astonishing character. And Walker does that too. If he were here, for instance, he'd be I've never tried it. It's a little like having a lit stick of dynamite in your hand and trying to have a conversation with Walker around. Because you never know where he's mobile, but he can do a bit of damage. And he'd be here trying to clear off. I know he would try and clear off those glasses with water, and I'd watch him, and I'd watch him, and I'd watch him, and I'd watch him. But eventually the moment would come when I would be distracted, and you would be distracted, and he'd do it. And then he'd just like peals of laughter. And I used to think, he's a psychopath. At 15, he's going to be in a state penitentiary, and I'm going to be not communicating with him through the plexiglass, sort of tapping it. But I realized after watching him do it, I don't know, several thousand times, that the reason he laughs is that he has had an opportunity to demonstrate that once in a while he can be as smart as I am. He can outsmart me and do that. He is quite aware of his incapabilities. He's aware that he is not like other people, that noises do not come almost randomly out of his mouth, that he can't walk as quickly as other people, that he can be picked up, but he can't pick other people up. He knows that, and I think he feels it. His isolation and his loneliness are intense, and so this is an opportunity for him to say, "Hey, Dad, once in a while, I tricked you." And I think it's a liberation for him, but it's mostly much more a liberation for me, because it means that I can relate to him at the level of being with him. It's hard sometimes to put this into words, but most of the time he's not doing what he's supposed to do. He's incomplete. He he's not the boy that he's supposed to be. But if I can be like him, then he is the boy he's supposed to be, and I am. We can be together and equal on that level, and that frees me from all the obligations of more orthodox success, all the things you're supposed to do as a human being, all the that afflict all of us. I don't have to do that with him.
There's a reviewer that feels that you were very hard on yourself. He said he's actually got a disability, and he said you never allow yourself a moment to relax, a moment to acknowledge that you did the best you could with the circumstances under your control. And he wonders why parents of disabled children feel such strong sense of guilt and responsibility.
Yeah, this is a disabled guy that has no children. Right. Well, that's my answer. If you have, you don't have to have a disabled child to feel like a failure. Winnicott, the famous British psychoanalyst, he said, the role of parents, especially the role of the father, there's only two things a father has to do. One is to stay alive long enough to get the children on their feet. In other words, don't drink yourself to death. Don't become involved in a war until the children are up on their feet. The other thing he said that you do as a parent is you fail your children. You fail them. Inevitably, you have to fail them. If you don't fail them, they have issues, as we call them in North America, for the rest of their lives. But the trick is to fail them gradually through natural idiocy, but not drop them off some emotional cliff, on their heads. And you feel that with any kid. With Walker, who is constantly in need and fairly steadily in pain and has no way out of it. I think it's fairly reasonable that when he used to hit himself, he would hit himself hard. Hard. He's wiry, but underneath he is granite, and he has somehow absorbed the skills of a good boxer, which is to keep your center close to you, to keep your elbows in, and you get more so he can really hit himself. I used to watch him do it. I just couldn't bear it. And what used to upset me even more is that sometimes he'd be in pain and he'd be hitting himself and it wouldn't do any good, and so he'd hit himself even harder and cry even harder. This, within this hitting himself, there was this hope that he could somehow make it better. It's just agonizing.
And interesting.
And there's centuries of guilt as well. The Greeks have been saying, Aristotle used to say, well, it's the parents' fault. If there's a disabled child, the parents did it. They did something wrong. So it's an ancient and collective guilt.
I found it fascinating, the tension, I guess, between the physical demands of looking after Walker and the emotional demands, both of which were huge. And you're very careful not to complain in the book. It's a description, not a complaint, about the incredibly taxing nighttime routine, for example, when Walker was younger. If you could tell us a little bit about what that involved night after night.
Yeah, there's no point in, as the mother of a CFC child said, there's no point in complaining. You just do what you have to do. The bigger issue is wondering what the value of his life is, or what the value of your own life is if you're spending it looking after this chasm that suddenly appears in front of you. That's where you really spend your time. But the nighttime is, he doesn't like to go to sleep, and he doesn't like to stay asleep, and so he requires an adult with him, so he doesn't hit himself, so he doesn't, rip his feeding tube out of his stomach, so he doesn't, escape and do... I remember. Can I digress briefly?
Sure.
It seems to be all I do is digress. So I remember once having dinner with some friends, and he was incapable of going upstairs, and he was incapable of opening a door. So I left him at the bottom of the stairs with the door closed. And I could hear him anyway. And we were eating dinner, and then all of a sudden I heard this noise, this kind of slightly musical noise in the distance. And I thought, I wonder what that is. So Walker's no longer at the bottom of the stairs. He suddenly developed the ability to zoom up the stairs and open the door. And I found him in the living room holding the last of 6 crystal glasses, which the other 5 of which he had smashed on this Noguchi glass coffee table to make this fantastic shattering of light and sound. and not a cut on him. So you don't want to let him get loose. So at night, once you get him to sleep, which involves singing the same things over and over and over. I could do that, but you don't want to hear that. Then maybe a couple of hours later, he'll wake up. You don't want him to wake up, because then he will become upset. So you have to give him some more chloral hydrate, and you have to give him another bottle. But that means you have to unhook him from the pump. You have to turn off the pump before you unhook him from the pump, because then it spills out on the floor. You have to pick him up out of his bed. You have to probably change him while he's trying to hit himself, and if you hold his hands, he'll kick himself. So you've got a live diaper and a live child, so you feel like James Bond, in the last seconds of the movie, diffusing the nuclear device. And finally you get him, and you've got to do all this in the semi-darkness, because you don't want him to wake up. Then you take him downstairs, and then you make him a bottle, which involves all kinds of titration of various fluids, and because he can't just drink formula, it has to be thickened to a certain degree so that he doesn't aspirate it. Then you bring him back up again. Then you forget the pump, and then you put him in the bed, and you bring back the pump, and then you hook him back up again. And then with any luck, he goes to sleep. And that might happen 3 times a night. So my wife and I traded off nights. So neither one of us got 2 consecutive nights of sleep, I guess, for about 10 years. Which, my wife's a very tolerant person, but, I'm a flaming idiot without any sleep. And so that became... But the strange thing is, when I finally would get him down, and I'd be holding him, so I'd have my arm behind his head, holding his left hand so he couldn't hit himself, and his right hand in this hand, and my leg over that leg, and this hand down on the other leg so he couldn't hit himself. And he'd finally sort of, put his bottle a certain way and turn around and sort of ass himself into me a bit. And, I knew then he was going to go to sleep. And for all the nightmare of that, it was still one of my favorite times, because, for a bit, he's an ordinary boy, and I'm an ordinary dad. And, it took me a long time to realize it, and I'm not a Pollyanna about these things. I despise, inspirational literature or misery memoirs, or, these are special children given to special people. I just can't bear that kind of thing. If Walker is God's idea of a gift, God needs to read the etiquette manual again, because a jar of jam or a bottle of wine would have been just fine. But, at those moments when it feels sort of normal again, I realize that this is one of his unintentional gifts to me, is to show me what it's like, how great it is to be a normal dad with a normal kid. But Walker parcels it out into so that I realize how valuable it is. So that for somebody with normal parents, Walker dancing with his sister in the living room, when Haley, who is 17 and brilliant and tall and gorgeous and smart, and when she deigns, to spend 20 seconds with him, and she dances around the living room, and she's a great dancer. And Walker is like over the moon doesn't even describe it. He's just so gone with happiness. And you realize when something connects with him, when he opens his eyes and he observes, I always know, pay attention to that. That's important. It doesn't matter whether it seems cliched or not, or pay attention to that, because that grace, that physical grace, his experience of her physical grace, his sudden astonishment at his tall sister's beauty is, if it makes it through to him, through that screen of his incapacity, how important must it be in reality, And that happens steadily.
You were saying before how, and I agree with you, the whole underlying search in this book is looking for Walker's inner life. And I was struck by one moment when you were talking to a doctor in what turned out to be quite a long and broad search for the meaning of Walker in science and in medicine. And he said, I think Walker can actually teach us something. He's approaching a Buddhist ideal of putting his mind aside and just being pure being. How useful was that idea for you in contemplating Walker?
Well, it's a nice possibility. I hope.
Sounds great.
It sounds great. Yeah. The only problem is, that's the problem with Buddhism. It's relevant if true, and I don't know if it's not always true, and the pain is very difficult. But that doctor, I had said, will I ever be able to explain? I'd taken Walker up north in Canada to this island. We have these islands where you can have a little cottage, and they're very beautiful, very peaceful. And the light, when the sun sets, there's a particular kind of light, and there's a steady breeze, and the pine trees are all blown to the east. The group of 7 painted this sort of thing, became famous. Anyway, you go up there and Walker changes. He becomes more alert and calmer. And I said, will I ever be able to explain to Walker? This doctor had just tested Walker for the first time at 2 and had told us for the first time how that he, was on, there's mild, medium, severe and profound mental retardation, intellectual disability, and Walker was certainly severe and occasionally profound, and sometimes medium, but mostly in the severe category. And the doctor, my wife, I still remember this is the thing about Walker, he stops time and everything crystallizes, so you can't forget it. The doctor said, he's this. And Johanna, my wife, was an American. She said, you mean he'll never be able to drive a car? For the Americans, this is a big deal, not being able to drive the car, because, you mean he won't be able to park? If he can't park, he's not a human being, parking is very big in the States, and getting a malt, that kind of thing.
There's no drive-through, only takeout.
So, anyway, he won't be able to read, was her other, and to both of us, we're, voracious readers, and that's a moment of great connection for us, and, never. And so I said, will he ever understand how great the wilderness is? Will I ever be able to explain that to him? Such a wankerish thing to say. And the doctor said, well, it sounds to me as if he already understands it. Like he changes in your arms. He made you realize that he's there. So as a Buddhist, he's way ahead of all of us because, he never apologizes. He never regrets anything. He never, he feels no envy, no greed. He's sort of, is Tom Gunn an Australian poet? Did he come to
I think he might be
Australia?
British.
Sorry?
He's British.
British, and then that's right, and he went to San Francisco and he became a speed freak, that's right. Anyway, he has a great poem called The Horse Chestnut Trees, and he talks about how the trees rise upward and outward without regret. That is, in my mind, a great description of Walker. For all his incapacity, he's not arrogant.
He's not arrogant.
Mm.
There's a beautiful moment you describe in the book where you talk about the way that you and Walker communicate. It's very specific, very limited, but it is communication.
Yeah, it is. I'm thinking that might be a book in it somehow. I don't know. When I see him, the first sound he ever made was ale, 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 ale. He did it slower. He would ale, 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 ale. But he would speak this phrase into the air at certain times. I couldn't figure out when he was using it, but on the principle that that's a significant utterance. That's how I always begin when I see him, and then I always go, because he responds to that, and so I'll go, and Walker will go. And I used to think that that meant, this is the great thing about this speculative approach to a human being's mind, it changes and when it needs to, but I used to think it meant, hello, Walkie, it's Dad, here I am. It's your dad. I'm here, Mighty Mouse is here to save the day, And Walker would say, hello, Dad. Yes, I know I'm clicking back. Isn't this interesting? We're both clicking. But now that he's older, I realize it's changed. And now it's me saying, hello, Walkie, it's me. Do you still recognize me? Do you still want to be around me? And he's saying the way he, I can almost see him arching his eyebrows, saying, yes, you old man, I'm still here. I know you're there. It's okay. I still recognize you. I never would have thought that Walker could comfort me. Arrogant, I suppose, but he does.
Because your life and your family's life changed hugely when Walker went into a group home to live with other carers. Tell us a bit about how that transition affected the family, and also how that moved into your search to find ways of, I think you used the words, graceful and meaningful ways for disabled people to live, and you went around the world in that search.
Yeah, it was a difficult decision. I had said early on, by the time Walker was 2 or 3 and was really smashing himself and was really, we just couldn't. We looked after him for 9 years, and with the help of Olga, our nanny. But I knew we wouldn't be able to keep it up. But whenever I said to my wife, we've got to find a home, she would say, no, forget it. I'm not ready for that, was the way she put it. And so secretly, for 8 years, I tried to find a place. I would sneak off to meet with bureaucrats, And it takes about, it's weird. In Canada, if I want a new knee, for instance, because I want to get back to telemark skiing the way I used to, I can probably get a new knee in 6 months at the longest. But I know a lot of doctors, and I'm a journalist, and I could probably, guilt them into giving me one in 2 months. It took 8 years to find a place for Walker to stay, because there's such a chronic shortage of these places.
And you discovered along the way how subjective and individual the system was, didn't you? You found that there were people who could advocate on your behalf to get things that other people couldn't get.
Oh yeah, no, it's the survival of the fittest. You have to get as much as you can, because if you don't get it, somebody else will get it. But if you take what they offer too soon, then you only get that, and you can't get more if you need more. So it really is like the law of the jungle. It's changing slowly as people come to terms with this new population of people that has been kept alive by medical technology. And in the old days, if you couldn't look after your kids, you were a bad parent, right? Simple. But these children, these people, require, they're kept alive by miracles of technology, and they cannot be looked after by 2 people, no matter how much you love them. But as a society, we're slow to catch up to that idea. We haven't caught up to it. We just don't. I think in Australia, it's still the case in some cases that if your child needs to be looked after by an external agency, you have to forfeit your rights as a parent. And that is no longer the case in Canada, because they've realized that you can care for Walker and not be able to look after him. So anyway, it was a long process, and when we finally I still remember that day. The first day we took him up to this new home. It was about 40 minutes away by car. And you go out, you have a practice weekend, and you have another practice weekend, and all this stuff is up there, and it's a brilliant place, staffed by brilliant people. And I remember coming back afterwards, driving in the car, Haley, Olga, Johanna, me. We drive on the left. I was driving. I don't know why that's relevant, but I was. And speeding down, nobody saying anything, but everybody intensely alert. You know, you've just given up your child who needs you. And we got back to the house, and we didn't do anything. We just had all this time. I mean, it was like there were these huge invisible curtains of time in the air in our house suddenly, everywhere. You know, you'd sort of move through them. And I kept thinking, you know, because Walker spends a lot of time downstairs with Olga, and they have a big playroom, and there's a laundry room, there's downstairs, and he loves the basement because there's all this stuff he can look into and scrabble around in. And I kept thinking, you know, he's down there, he's down there, he's you know, in the corner, looking for sort of treasure that's hard to find, and then I would realize, you know, there's nothing down there now. I mean, it was the most, I can't even talk about it. I mean, it was as though somebody had taken away my soul. It took a long time to get used to.
I remember reading your reactions in the book to discovering that Walker was changing after he had moved into the group home, that he was actually making some improvements in some areas, and what a mixed feeling that must have raised in you. Obviously happy that was happening, but not with you.
Well, no, it's fantastic. I mean, you know, 2 weeks, and he was going from room to room. He had a Schwarzenegger swagger, sort of, you know, like, I'm back, I'm here. We would go up to see him, and when he'd had enough of us, he would grab our hands and lead us to the front door and sort of push us out the door and say, you know, ta-ta, I've got people to talk to. You know, it was really quite amazing. And I think that's because, later, I mean, I write about this in the book, in my search for I worry about what will happen to him after I'm gone. I mean, Haley will look after herself, I'm pretty sure. But Walker, I mean, he needs a community, and I don't want him to be just in a community where he's being cared for, where the locus, the focus of the group is, you know, we're helping them. I want him to be in a community where the disabled create their own spirit, their own community. So it's it was complicated to. It's difficult to find your way to that, but Walker, for all his life, had spent time with people who were more capable than him, right? Who could do things he couldn't do. Suddenly, he's in a group where he's actually more capable than some of them. There were little girls who actually liked. There was a woman, a young girl, a very pretty girl, who was in a wheelchair, and it was an electric wheelchair. She could only move a bit, and Walker would come up, and he would jump up on the side of the chair, and he would drive her chair all around the house. And she would say, "Walker, what are you doing? Walker, what are you doing?" It was like a scene out of a Doris Day movie. I mean, it was unbelievable. She obviously loved the fact that Walker was driving her chair around the house. And I don't know. He suddenly occupied a world where, and this is what I found. Finally found a community that was like this in France, run by a guy called Jean Vanier. There's a worldwide network of them. It's called L'Arche. In fact, I think there are two, and there's one in Canberra, and there might be another one elsewhere. And these communities are communities where the disabled set the agenda, not just the agenda of the day, but they set the emotional agenda, they set the intellectual and the moral agenda, I guess, of the place. And it was so, you know, there's a great deal of talk about segregation, and that everybody should be integrated into the society. There should be absolutely no difference between the disabled and us. I mean, for some people, integration is brilliant. The school system in Canada is 18 years of integration. Unfortunately, you know, the rest of society is not so integrated. So at 18, you've got the problem all over again.
I love how you quote Jean Vanier from the from L'Arche as saying, talking about the questions that we ask ourselves in relation to disabled people. The right question is, how can I help my son be happier? The wrong question is it my fault? But it seems like as a society, we want to ask any of those questions. We just want to kind of put it all to one side. And you talk a little bit about the appalling history of the treatment of disabled people, mentally and physically disabled people. So do you think that you found a model in L'Arche that is actually a good one for people living with a disability, not just as a mere mode of survival, but as actually an enriching way of living?
Oh, I think so. I think that, in fact, they could take the L'Arche system even. What happens in the L'Arche system is there are houses, and you have 7 or 8 people of a similar level of disability, all intellectually disabled as well as physically. And they live in one house, and then there's another house, and they form communities. The great thing about these communities is that I think we're all terrified of disability. And it reminds us of our own disabilities. It reminds us of our own death. It reminds us of our fragility. We don't know how to fix it. We don't know how to solve the problem. We need to push it away or solve it with some bureaucratic solution. Whereas, I mean, even to this day, when I go into a room full of disabled people, I'm petrified. There's the noises and the broken bodies and I don't know, what am I going to do? How am I going to react? Will I react the right way? But the disabled, they don't want you to do that. They don't care about that. All they care about is, do you like me? And can you be my friend? And that turns out to be, it removes the requirement of power. You don't have to be in control. I remember the first lunch I had at a L'Arche community. This is in France. And the meals are very important. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Everybody has that together. All the disabled, and each one of them has an assistant, an able-bodied person, and everybody eats together. Fantastic meals. Of course, this is in Picardy. These incredible bouillabaisses, and just fantastic. So we're sitting there and we're saying grace, right? And I'm holding hands with 2 disabled people. And the hands of disabled people, Walker's hands are like they're like pork chops. I mean, they're thick, and you're holding somebody who's different. So that's, and I'm a fastidious dink, so I'm sitting, it's so weird, and sitting at the lunch. And this guy sitting next to me, his name is Jean-Claude, and he's 55, he's in a wheelchair, he cannot speak, he's got a large stuffed raccoon strapped to the arm of his wheelchair, and I'm sitting next to him, and he doesn't speak. And I'm going, what am I going to, it's the silence. My God, it'll be so embarrassing. I'm such an idiot. But so we're sitting, and I say, Jean-Claude, how are you? Well, some wine? There's a bottle of wine. I pour Jean-Claude a glass of wine. But his hand is paralyzed. He can't quite get it up. So here, let me help you. I pour myself wine. I take his wine like this. He puts his hand on my hand up to his lips. I pick up my wine. But now he wants to help me with my wine. So we've got this, this 4-way thing going, right? And we're with wine, okay? And we're about to we help each other sip. And I say, Santé, the French toast. The wine is down. We survived that. Jean-Claude goes, ha ha, like this. That's it. That's the entire encounter. But it was, I can't describe it, because I had no expectation of it being, I don't know what one expects a toast will be, a gesture of fellowship and brotherhood, sisterhood. Because it had no expectation, it could be what it was, and it was freeing, unpredictable, unslavish, human, completely human encounter. And this is the thing about these communities. I mean, you no longer, because you go in without needing to dominate, you don't have to sort of lead with the need to dominate, and that turns out to be a very, I mean, I think they should expand it. I think they should build in fact, if I can make this happen, I will. But when they make a large community, instead of just having the disabled and their assistants living there, I think they should build a ring of cabins or studios around the community, so that the able-bodied, I mean, a writer or a publisher or a composer or an artist or a business person, trying to figure out some deal, can go and live there for 2 and 3 weeks at a time. And all they have to do is have breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day in the community, and once a week they have to give somebody a bath. I think 3 weeks in that community would change the way we approach the world. I mean, when you look at the world today, I mean, we suffer from wanting to dominate it. I mean, the struggle for power. I mean, Israel and Palestine? I mean, look at that, We're going to blow you out of the water unless you do what we want. No, we're going to blow you out of the water unless you do what we want. That never happens in an encounter with somebody who's disabled, because you can't do it. You go in and you have to say, I don't know what to do. What? I don't know what to do. Help me. I'm not, Walker's not weak, but he's fragile. But so help me, show me. What can we do together? I think that is a very necessary moral place to get to, and when people say Walker is a deleterious effect of nature, as a geneticist once said to me, that physically he has not advanced the human cause. That's true, but ethically, I think the disabled may be enormously important to our evolution.
And I was struck by how there are these wonderful moments of illumination in the book, moments where the reader sits back and thinks, yes, that is how it could be, that would be beautiful, that would be right. But your journey also took you to some rather dark places. There are moments when you talk about visiting strip clubs and in a search, I guess, to rediscover the basic human feelings and needs that you have had to be subsumed. What was it like realising that you had these needs too that needed to be dealt with?
You would have to bring that up, of course.
It's in the book.
Well, it was a weak moment. What can I say?
Well, I just think it's really interesting because it's something that a lot of people would not have written about. That would have stayed part of the rules that having a disabled child forces you to make up on your own. I think I'll just keep that quiet. But it's a really human moment, and it's a moment where the reader thinks, of course, you're not just looking for Walker as a person, but you're having to remember that you have needs as a human being as well.
Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, you live a life. The chasm appears of his life. You don't know what his life means, and you no longer know what your own life means. And after he moved into the home, I became, for a year before that, I kept going to my doctor, and I said, I've got this pain in my stomach. And the doctor said, you have no pain in your stomach. I said, no, I've got a pain in my stomach. I can actually feel the pain. He said, no, there's nothing there. I mean, I was scoped. I don't even want to talk about it. Right, left, and center, and nothing. And then when Walker moved away and he was happy, the pain went away. So it's a very well, anyway, he went away, and I didn't know, and I reverted, I think, to what do I know about myself? Well, I was a man in my 40s. I've always liked women. Like most men, nakedness is of some appeal to me. Naked women, in my case, are of some appeal. There was a place where I could go and look at them, and once in a while I did, for a short stretch. It wasn't, it wasn't very satisfying, and it didn't replace the gap, but one tries. One tries everything. I mean, there are other changes, of course, that are more salutary. When I remember being at a Christmas party with my wife, and at an office party, and a lot of women don't really know this, but a lot of married guys, they spend a lot of time at parties looking at their wives, watching them, not necessarily admiring them, just watching them like specimens, moving about the social landscape and going, oh, I wonder why she's doing that. Oh, look at that, isn't that interesting? It's such a, I think that's true. Is it not? I mean, I'm looking at you. I don't want to put you on the spot, but he does it as well. Anyway, I remember sitting in this bar, and I was watching my wife be flirted with by a guy I know well, and I know what a terrorist he can be. And I know what he's like, and so I watched them having a drink, and they were both having a vodka tonic, and they were standing at the bar. They're both tall, and they're shoulder to shoulder, and she was laughing, and she was really having a good time. I could see that, and I thought, I haven't seen my wife laugh like that in my company. And I could make her laugh. I mean, I know how to make her laugh in ways that other people can't, as husbands and wives can, but not like that, not all out, full on, ha ha ha, in a long time. Because, we've been spending our time, looking after this being, this guy we can't get you never can predict. And I remember looking at her and thinking, I wonder, I remember thinking, I think he's in love with her. And I had, in fact, asked him once if he was, because he'd given early indications. And I'd said, are you in love with my wife? And he said, yes. And I said, well, in a bad way? In a way that's a problem? He said, well, not in a way that's a problem. And I said, okay, well, crush away then. That's fine. But this had gone on for some time. And I remember watching them at the bar and thinking, I wonder what the hell is going on over there. And I thought, well, should I go over? Should I do the thing? Say, we were here first, or whatever that is. That got, it's such an ungraceful thing to do as well, just, hi, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And the answer is, yeah, exactly. Remember this? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, what are you talking about? We're talking about you. Fuck off. So pardon my language. That was unintentional. So, but I remember watching and thinking, yeah, and I know her. Like, I've seen her sobbing, unexpectedly at night. I've seen her come downstairs and say, can you go upstairs and take him? I said, well, I took him last night. Well, can you please? He's, I've seen her come down and say, he's gone away. I don't know where to find him. And I've seen her say, not too long ago, she said, I don't feel like his mummy anymore. I said, why? She said, because I'm not the one who takes care of him most of the time anymore. And I said, you're still his mummy, for crying out loud, and don't use that word mummy because it upsets me. This sort of thing. I've seen her, at the bottom of the darkness. I really have. And I thought, how can I go and stop her from having a good time with this flirting idiot? I mean, how can I stop that? I can't do that. I just cannot. It's not fair. And in that way, I mean, Walker, had the experience of this difficulty, has, I think, it makes you make your own rules. And you realize that many of the rules we have they're about power and control. And power and control is not all that it's cracked up to be.
I guess the question of what value does a life have, you could argue that that's quite a dangerous question to ask in our society. Is that something that you had in mind when you wrote this book, which is about looking for the value of Walker's life and the implications that raises?
Oh, yes. That was, from the very beginning. quite apart from keeping him alive, giving him the right medicines, doing the right thing, getting him to at least put on a little weight, getting him to the point where he was self-sustaining. Those were big deals, but always the bigger deal for me was, what has this done to us? And if I have to do this, what's the point? I mean, what is the value of Walker's life and our lives around him? But I do think it is, I think he's the antidote to the really dehumanizing grind of the survival of the fittest. I said to Johanna once, as we were talking, and we would always talk at night, because during the day, one of us was always taking him, to the neurologist or the geneticist or the head doctor, the bum doctor. There's a doctor for everything, it turns out. Or dealing with some issue he has.
Or so maintaining your jobs, which you both maintained throughout this whole time.
Tried to anyway. But so we would talk at night, and we would sort of lie there side by side. I don't know if everybody does this, but you sort of lie there side by side, and you talk into the night, right? You talk up into the darkness, and it's such a great metaphor, and sometimes you connect, and sometimes you don't. I said to her, would you have had an abortion if there'd been a test for what Walker has? And there never will be, because it'll never be economical. There's only 130 people in the world who have it. And it's too hard to find anyway. And it doesn't show up. I said, would you have had this test? And would you have had the abortion if there'd been a test? And she said, that's not a fair question. You can't ask me that now. Walker's, he's in my life. He's a character. But before, when he was in utero, yes, absolutely. So it does clarify these issues of abortion: what's living, what's not, what's alive, what's not. You have a very concrete answer to those questions. And she said, but before, yes, I would have. Not for my sake, she said, or not for your sake, but for Walker's sake, because his life is so difficult. I would have changed Walker for another child if I could have. And I said, well, what do you think the world would be like if there were no Walkers? And, these are very real issues. Down syndrome, for instance, is on its way to being extinct. There is a population of people with Down syndrome. They've just become fewer and fewer and fewer, because more and more people, more and more reliably, choose not to have those children. I said, what do you think the world would be like if there were no Walkers? And Johanna said, I think it would be like Sparta. It would be a severe and less humane place. So, yes, I think. It makes me uncomfortable to say, well, my son's purpose is to make everybody be a better person. Screw that. Why? Nobody should have to live that life. But it is one of the side effects, and a welcome one.